Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McClintic, and today we're going to be talking all about how to make your out-of-home advertising stand out in this AI era. All those AI companies are using billboards, particularly here in San Francisco, where I live. They are everywhere. So how do you make yours stand out? And so to talk about that, I'm joined by Nicole Pytel. Hey, Nicole, how are you?
Hey, Morgan. Hey, everybody. Really excited about this topic. Really excited for our guest today because he might just be the most passionate person about out-of-home I've ever encountered. So no better person to talk about this.
Right, exactly. Rick Robinson, who's the CEO of PJX Media. Rick, great to see you. Welcome back to Fired Up.
Thank you for having me. Great to see both of you, Morgan, Nicole. Look forward to talking about this. I was just up in the city not long ago, and you are right. It is now the land of AI billboards.
Oh, it is indeed. And so let's start there. So, what are you seeing? What's driving this sudden explosion of all the AI startup billboards? Is it just the AI hype? Is it actually a strategy? Is it something else entirely?
I think it's all the above. And it reminds me of the dot-com boom in that sense, where suddenly they've taken over. And it also echoes what you see in other markets that have a dominant industry. If you're in the west side of LA, you're going to see the streamers and the theatrical releases and all that content. If you're in, Midtown during Fashion Week, you're going to see all the fashion brands. If you're in the Midwest, you're going to see stuff to do with agriculture, right? And so just reflecting what's hot in the market. The inventory has gone from being fairly wide open a year ago to being what we call very tight, right? Very little room. The Skyway coming into the city's full of big boards for AI, up and down the 101 freeway, which is like the spinal cord of Silicon Valley, and then into the other street level formats, the kiosks on the streets, down into BART, the Caltrain station at 4th Street, all over. And so they have taken ownership of San Francisco, the city, and the Bay Area visually. And, what's the strategy? I think in a headline, it's proof of life. We're here. We exist. This is for real. We're not going away. And we want to announce that. That's like the most fundamental. But the campaigns go beyond the San Francisco Bay Area. We just did a campaign for Figma all over the globe. You're seeing it in San Francisco and feeling it there because that's where a lot of it comes from. So that's, in your own backyard kind of a thing. But the use of out-of-home is global.
So we've got this jungle of AI billboards and out-of-home all over San Francisco. But how do you actually stand out? Do you remember any of these billboards or signs that you're seeing anywhere? When the market's totally saturated, what do you do to actually make people remember you?
Well, it is a jungle, that's for sure, in terms of number of formats. What I mentioned with the big billboards on the freeways, the 101 and the 80 and the Skyway, the street level inventory, the BART stations, getting into the neighborhoods. It's very complex. And it works differently in different parts of the city, and it works differently when it works together. So I think the first thing any AI brand wants to do, or any startup adjacent to that, where they're looking at going into San Francisco or other cities, but let's just use San Francisco Bay Area as an example, is to really get some good advice, right? You might think you can bring somebody on your team and DIY it and say, well, they'll call a billboard company and pick a couple boards and here we go. And that could work, but probably not for long. Because just like you wouldn't go into a court of law without an attorney, you ought not buy media without somebody on your team or someone that you've hired temporarily or something to give you some expert advice. There's many layers and you can get lost. And so that's what I see happen sometimes. We just not really understanding how the medium works. The other part in terms of standing out or not standing out is don't buy too little for too brief of a time. Like you've got to come into it to make a statement and be ready to invest and ready to hold your ground and ready to look at the entire landscape from For what happens when people land at San Jose Airport and SFO, all their way into the city, what happens in the city, what parts of the city. Realize that you're going to have a lot of competition during conferences around Moscone. Understand the commute patterns you're looking for. And then also think about, what is your purpose? Is this prospect targeting to support the sales team, where you want to get around the key businesses you're going after? Is this to feel good? Is this ego for the CEO when they land at SFO Airport? Is this morale? Is this recruiting? It's really taking apart that layer cake and understanding what you're going to do when you get in there. I have seen some AI brands try to get, snappy with their headline. Like one of them said, I think it was for a group called Artisan. I can't remember.
Yeah, Artisan, yeah.
Yeah, stop hiring humans. Okay. Well, that's one way to get attention. You can have a very intriguing, a very dramatic headline. That's got to connect to something meaningful for it to last. One thing you don't want to do is get too jargony, get too detailed, and have somebody design your out of home that has not done out of home before. I've seen that before too, where it's clear that art director may only have experience doing digital or print, and those skill sets for design don't necessarily translate to the out of home space.
Yeah, I think that Artisan one that you flagged there, everyone was talking about it. So good brand recognition, stop hiring humans. And they had slightly strange designs. So that sort of got them noticed. I don't know what they do. So I don't know, it's brand recognition.
It kickstarted the conversation. And the other thing to take into account there, they made it a big investment. It was an abundant number of formats. It was citywide, from what I recall. And they stayed with it for a minute. And so that, it certainly achieved the first part was upper funnel recognition. What's going on? What are we talking about? I would say, come in with a singular purpose and stick to it. Think like an investor and a citizen of the space, and the public will respond accordingly.
Yeah. You mentioned proof of life, which I like. I do see companies get their funding. They'll do a very small billboard somewhere, take a photo, use it on social, and the job is done, right? Because we're here, we've got our proof of life, as you say, and that's the campaign, and they're in and they're out. So I do see that a fair bit.
And if that was the job, if that was the goal, then mission accomplished.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just a tiny bit of what out of home could do for them.
We are also seeing larger companies like Brex build digital billboards in Times Square, and then have their customers come onto there. Like, we're going to give almost as a benefit some smaller startups who are, I guess they're Brex customers, using that, getting access to this, saying, oh, I've been given this billboard. And then they get the social media photo. It's really all they're looking for. And that's great for them. And I guess also quite a good strategy for a bigger late stage company, Brex. And I think that's a new trend.
Yeah, Brex approach is pretty inventive, very unusual for the category, very unusual use of the medium, a great way to bring new brands into the medium. I thought it was very clever, and they've been at it for a little while. I think they've been doing that promotion for a couple of years, maybe longer. So nothing can do what out of home can do in any number of unlimited ways. The other thing we see happening, just mentioning late stage financing, and what we've noticed is that when a company gets to series, the DEF financing, and they're starting to get some pre-IPO rumors happening, that's when they'll go big. Get into all the financial markets globally, really make that big presence, which is taking the single moment of a social media post and making that really make a pronounced statement in real life. And that tends to really pay off, because out of home brings a sense of credibility, of permanence. And it's not just the digital out of home either. It's the big printed walls and spectaculars that really make that strong tentpole statement.
That's a really good point. And does that kind of trickle down to some of the smaller startups that might be looking for funding? I mean, they can't go as big as a pre-IPO company can go, but is it a tactic that if you're a little bit smaller, maybe you pull some money together and hope that you get some investor attention that way?
I think if you've got a real good sense of the where, like the geography of it all, then that can really work for you. And we've done a ton of those type of campaigns where it's business to business via out of home. And it works when it's hyper geo-targeted and there's really strong intelligence about where you want to be. Even down to, hey, this banker is in this building, or these series of bankers are these series of buildings. And maybe it's a big wall. Maybe it's just one bus shelter right in front of it at the right place. We've even done a mix of bigger, smaller, branded shoe shine stands. I mean, you name it, right? Just something where you have that visibility. It's like, oh, here they are. It goes back to that proof of life credibility every single time.
Yeah, and that makes good sense. If you're targeting a very small group of investors, like they're walking past that place every day, they're going to see that billboard. So what are some of the common misconceptions that you think that B2B founders and marketers in general have about out of home? Something that you wish more startups understood before they sort of go live with their campaign?
There's a couple. One thing is this notion that you can get premium inventory for 10 cents on the dollar if you just wait around and negotiate and hustle.
Right.
I want to be on Sunset Strip for $10,000. Well, okay, good for you. That's really not going to happen. And so that just kind of misconception there. But more broadly is this desire to try to force out of home into a lower funnel performance medium. You can do some measurement that is directional in that way, that measures brand lift and website activity lift and things like that. You can look at basic organic things like, hey, did search go up when I was running out of home in a certain market? But what out of home really does is put wind at the back of the funnel. It's top of the funnel and enhances everything down funnel. And understand that and believe in that and commit to that. We'll have sometimes performance-minded folks, and this is what they know. So, not bum rapping them here. It's like they'll come and say, well, what is the click-through rate for out of home? It's a bit of an invalid question. And that's because you're trying to take one thing and make it behave like another. Now, out of home is measurable, and you can do campaigns that are measurable, and you can understand how out of home impacts the overall mix by testing. And some markets have out of home with your lower funnel activity and others don't, and then look at the difference. Ultimately, though, those who use out of home well walk in with a belief system and have that leap of faith.
So let's talk about that leap of faith. And I'm glad you brought up the metrics, because I definitely wanted to ask you about that, because, we see it all the time with startups, even doing a LinkedIn campaign or a paid search campaign. They've got a CEO or a board or investors that they have to answer to. And before they launch a campaign, they have to say, well, here's how we're going to measure success. And here's what we're expecting to get out of it. You can bet that those higher ups are going to come back and say, well, how did you do with our money? Out of home, you can measure. But if you're a B2B brand, especially a startup where every penny's going to count, you're going to be held accountable for the performance, you're going to have to report back at the end of the month or the end of the quarter. How do you kind of make the case for out of home, and how do you show the performance? What should you be looking for to report back to your CEO or your board?
Well, there's a few things on that. I think these days, startup or no startup, we're all under pressure from the board to account for every penny, right? And so the world we live in. And that's important. It's important because when you're looking at your media investment, it's clear to identify what the purpose of that investment is. And you can speak to the lower funnel activity and the expected metrics. And those channels can give you benchmarks that you can invest against and try to be predictive about. And I don't think out of home is going to perform in that criteria set. It's just not going to. What you can do is come forward and say that you believe that it enhances the power of the brand, that it's going to enhance the power of the sales team out in the field, and that it's going to put some wind at the back of the overall media mix, and then go forward in ways to test that. Get with the sales team. Where are the target markets? Where are the target companies you're going after? What does that target look like geographically? Boil that down to a series of points of interest and do some testing, which would be worthwhile to do. In a couple key markets, let's include out of home in our mix, and others let's not, and see if we can see a noticeable difference. And if we do, we can understand and at least have done the work to know how out of home may or may not add to the overall mix. I think one of the biggest challenges for the out of home business is that out of home may have inadvertently forsaken its greatest strength, while focusing so hard on trying to compete on digital measurement. Like out of home for the last decade, we're measurable, which we are. It's directional measurement. It's not down to the click. We're trying to fight a battle on the lower funnel stuff that I don't think we're going to win one-on-one. But we can win the battle on upper funnel. And we've kind of forgotten that. We've forsaken the things that only out of home can do in order to try to win at something that we're not going to win at.
I do think there's a need to sort of justify any investment. And, even in digital media, you can measure impressions and clicks and cost per lead. But there's always a battle to go lower and lower down the funnel and to prove that attribution. And what's their attribution model? And it gets more and more complex. It takes a lot of knowledge to be able to do that well. And most companies don't do it that well. So you're ending up just looking at metrics and not thinking about the idea, right?
Yeah, look, I wish I had a better, more succinct answer. I think that's the rub, right?
Right.
The brands I see do well in out of home are willing to take that leap of faith and stay with it. I mean, I don't think Apple's spending $100 million plus a year on out of home and measuring lower funnel conversions in order to justify that expenditure.
Probably not.
And look at even other things that work really well in out of home. Personal injury attorneys all over billboards. People can make fun of that. Attorneys don't like to lose. They want to be smart with their money and invest in what wins. That's proof that it works. So there are a lot of cases, you can go on and on, where out of home impacts a category over and over and over again. And tried and true, yet there isn't the specific lower funnel evidence showing exactly precisely what is contributing to each and every sale. And so just some of that, like I call it a leap of faith, has to happen. I get it. I think if someone's going in and saying, I've got a really small budget, we're trying to get off the ground. I can only spend money if I know this exactly precisely is going to get me a new meeting. Maybe out of home isn't right for them at that moment. But do a great board in the south of market, support your sales team. Maybe the number of new meetings your sales team goes up.
Yeah. And you've got to be ready to sort of catch the extra attention that you're going to get, convert that attention once you're getting it. So A, you've got to be able to afford it and have that leap of faith. But B, you've got to be pretty confident that, hey, if we get inside people's heads here and, they come to our website or they get contacted by our sales team, that we're going to be able to convert that attention into revenue at some point. And we have a good mechanism to do that. And, there's a lot of pieces in terms of having the right market fit and having a great sales team. And there are other marketing elements in place before you do that so that you can feel very good about this top line.
Yeah, it all definitely connects. And all those pieces have to work together, which goes back to understanding the role of out of home in the overall mix.
So let's talk about creative. What makes for good creative? Is it all about being culturally relevant? Is it about being hyper local? Is it super timely? Is it a little bit of everything? Does it depend on your brand? Does it depend on how much of a leap of faith your boss is willing to take? What does good creative look like right now?
Like it's always looked, which is one idea, 2 or 3 elements, high contrast, a clear hierarchy of the elements. And it's not about the brand, it's about the public. You got to bring a message that people can consume when they're out there in their life. And it's a very interesting dynamic. Because when people are out of the house, you have this terrific advantage because they're very alert and they're in consumption mode and they're scanning their world around them in this visual rapid fire triage, right? Making sense of everything. They're seeing you, but you've got to get through quickly. You've got to say one thing and the same thing all day, every day, over and over again. So boiling it down to that single idea is probably the single most important thing you could do. And then from there, like I said, just a few elements, high contrast. You can't get too fussy with the art direction. It's not a print ad. It's out in public space. Now, if I'm in a dwell time environment, you might be able to put some more nuance into the visual. If I'm standing there, if it's a standby or walk by experience, well, then there could be more layers. If it's drive by, certainly less nuance and chunk it up a bit. I always advise, spend all your time getting down to that single most important idea. Commit there, the rest will follow. If you have time to add a little intrigue or humor, that's helpful. People like to solve a puzzle. It can't be too much of an inside joke. Jargon's a problem. I saw some recent AI campaigns in the city where it was just code.
Yeah. It's deliberate to exclude, like, if you know, I guess that's the intent.
I think it's cute for a minute, but then pay it off pretty quick. Or have some sort of, maybe the code's the visual and some sort of headline that makes sense of all that. It always boils down to the same thing. One idea, a few elements, high contrast.
Right. And that's a problem that a lot of startups will face, because we were just talking about writing short recently. And, one of the problems is a lot of startups, they are still finding their fit, their messaging. They don't want to exclude anyone, because we're trying to have as big a market and be as applicable as possible to as many people. And so having one idea, Chris, who's another one of our co-hosts, sort of said, it's a bit like all the people trying to get through the door at the same time. Nobody gets through the door, right? And so coming up with that one idea and sort of having the confidence that this is the message in as clear a way as possible, I think is perhaps where having a partner, quite apart from the buying the media and just having someone to give you the confidence to go, this is the idea and this is how we should phrase it. That's where the value is, because it's very difficult to do it for yourself and get it right.
It forces the business to really do some work and understand what they're about. And sometimes businesses aren't ready to focus that much on their idea. But if you look back at all the Obie books of winning out of home campaigns or any public communication, it's always very clear and very singular what they have to say. They're picking one thing. I can recall the ads that Apple did for iPod 10, 15 years ago. And you might remember they were like a silhouette of someone dancing with just the earbuds in, right? Didn't tell me how many songs it held, how long the battery life was, what it weighed. No feature dumping whatsoever. It communicated one idea, which is you alone with your music, dancing to the song. Everybody can understand that. But that worked because they were courageous enough to commit to one idea.
And we're still talking about it.
Sometimes I think you can do the exercise in reverse and get the leadership of the company in the room and ask yourself, if we could just say one thing and only one thing to defend our right to be here, to justify our purpose, what is it? And if you can do that work, that'll help the rest of your company for sure, but it'll really help you become singular and powerful out in the public space, whether it's a sign on the side of your building or a billboard or whatever it might be.
And usually the number of people you bring in is the number of answers you're going to get to that question. You ask 4 people, what's the single most important thing that we need to convey? And all 4 of them say something totally different. And then you got to kind of bring them all together. That's the hard part.
And sometimes, that's where you end up maybe with 3 or 4 different headlines in a campaign that are all sort of pointing at the same end. That could work as well, as long as there's a visual continuity to it. So the investment looks organized, at the very least a common colorway of some sort. And there's argument to be said that works well too. 3 to 5 headlines that are all pointing in the same direction so people can get the sense of the feel. But the only way that works is if you have abundance of investment. You need a lot of it on the street.
Yeah. Because if you're running them all at the same time, you've got to see them separately around the place, or you've got to run them in sequence. And again, that's a bigger budget because you're sort of telling a story.
I'll often ask brands, like, when they start thinking about the creative and what they're going to say, is what are you willing to fight for? So that starts bringing it out, starts shedding away the edges, and can really get down to that singular point.
It's a good one. It's a couple of years since we spoke to you. And at that time, there was a big trend around these sort of digital ads that look like a billboard. And you sort of saw a Barbie, stepping out of a billboard and walking down a street in New York or what have you. They were sort of fake billboards, but existed only in a sort of social sphere. So that was a trend then. Are we still seeing that? And I guess a sort of follow-on question is, what trends are you seeing? Bring us up to date.
Sure. Well, that was, I think, a fad that stayed a fad, which I was surprised. I thought it would become a common tactic that landed in its own place, but it seemed to be about an 18-month cycle where a lot of brands are like, woo, I can hire some CGI and we can do this and put it on our social. My guess is the public lost interest because there's something about being real versus not. And they all kind of looked the same too. They all had this common thread of hokiness that kind of went with it. Although some of them were quite spectacular. I kind of welcomed it. I liked it. A compliment to out-of-home media and really just energy towards communicating in the public space. So that was welcomed in my view. I'm surprised it lost steam. Or maybe we're just not noticing it anymore.
Maybe people don't want to be deep faked. It's getting a bit too real now. And so we're sort of getting a bit more attuned to it. Those tools in that time for us, we can all produce these now. Before you needed to be a brand with a budget to do it. Now I can just type it into Sora and get it done.
Right. And we certainly live in an era of deep doubt, right? We live in this era where anything digital we're suspect of. And if it looks rounded off on the edges in any way or homogenized in any way, we're immediately suspect of. And maybe one of the unexpected outcomes of that is brands just being, resistant to be seen in that light. What I see happen out of home from it is continuation of existing trends, which over the last decade, which is most all of the capital expenditures in out of home are in digital. And so that's creating more and more digital hardware in a place-based way. In the retail environment, we're going to see an explosion of that, and that more and more of that is happening. We'll see it in more public spaces, like now inside some New York subway trains are digital screens that have full motion. I think that the reality of all the paper posters in the New York subways becoming a digital screen is already happening and will be fully upon us. And so that continues. And I believe that digital out-of-home revolution will be culturally, socially, economically more powerful than the TV revolution was in the 1950s. And I know that's a big statement, but bear with me. When TV first hit, and there was a TV in every living room, right? At the time, there were just a few channels, and you could reach like half of America with one show, right? The Palmolive Comedy Hour, right? And everybody talked about it the next day. It was like the Super Bowl every single day. Immense power. Now, if you look at television, in whatever way you look at it, the viewership is so fragmented, right? The strongest news show on cable TV gets maybe 1% of the U.S. population. But the digital channel that reaches everybody out in the public space is digital at home. And as more and more of that inventory gets converted, it becomes more and more powerful. And it will reach a tipping point. And we've already seen the power of this at play a few years ago when war in Ukraine broke out. All over the globe, there were digital boards with blue and yellow like the flag that said support Ukraine. That wasn't even organized. That happened organically. And it showed you how you could reach the whole world like that with the digital out-of-home ecosystem. Why brands haven't jumped on that yet, I don't know. But at some point, as more and more and more of this becomes digital, as the pipes that feed into it become more organized and easier to access, I think the brands will follow and be very quick to say, hey, wait a minute, I need a message out tomorrow to the whole world. This is how I do it. Those screens, abundance of screens in all shapes and sizes are going to morph into the screen. That's not only commerce, but public safety, wayfinding, art, all of it, for what it's.
So you're almost saying that in the early days of advertising and sort of, the series in 1950s, you could reach the whole population. Now, because of digital and it's so pervasive, you're almost re-aggregating everyone back again that you could, with a bit of coordination, reach everyone at the same time. I mean, they're all in different places, but the technology has managed to get to the point where you could implement a campaign and get your message across to everyone at once if you wanted.
Imagine flipping a switch. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Imagine going on Trade Desk and going, bang, I want to be everywhere.
Right. It would not need to be a long period. You could do it in a short period and, it would be pervasive.
So I don't think that's out of reach. In fact, I think it's inevitable. And so I'm excited about that. I don't know what the unexpected outcomes of that are going to be, but I'm excited about that.
I think that's a very cool concept. Are you seeing other trends in advertising, specifically out-of-home advertising? Not just the sort of AI companies are buying ads, but are there other sort of genre trends that we should, or opportunities that we should keep our eye on?
I don't know. Look, the D2C brands are becoming more and more comfortable with it. There's certainly a narrative out there where they come to us all the time with this, where it's like, hey, look, we grew up on search and social. That's how we made our way. That's becoming less efficient and a little more challenging. We've also found that if we turn off the faucet, sales stop. And so how do we build a brand? How do we put some momentum on this that can sustain itself? Where do we put out of home on top of that mix to give it the weight and staying power? And unfortunately, we don't have the best answers on. I wish we could say that. I wish we could say, if you take 20% of your search and social budget and put it in out of home, your click-through rate will go up X. We don't know how to answer that, but we know it will impact it. So I see more and more of those brands coming to out of home. I see pharma coming to out of home. I think pharma on television has gotten saturated. We almost turn off to all of it. And there's been some great success stories recently with pharma and out of home, with out of home attribution, where you've been able to look at the impact on the lift in web visits and, the directional measurement we can get on attribution. And I think you're going to see that vertical come to out of home in a very aggressive way in the next 1 to 3 years, would be my expectation. And all the other categories that always love it.
Do you think, Rick, we're living in the digital world, it's a zero-click era right now. AI overviews and ChatGPT, they're pulling website traffic away. You look at the social platforms, they're becoming more pay-to-play. You can't just throw up a LinkedIn post anymore and expect the bulk of your followers to see it. Do you think those trends will lead more people to out of home, or do you think it'll make more brands open to out of home because the traditional channels are changing so much?
Well, boy, we sure hope so. Look, I think out of home is a human instinct. Humans leave their house. We're visual by nature. Brands want to reach humans. Out of home exists. The technology that you use to create the visual changes, from printed posters to big printed vinyls to digital screens and now holograms and things like that, that changes. But the notion of reaching people when they're out of the house in a concurrent way, when they're out in public and they're visually triggered, I think that always stays in place. And humans respond to brands as much as they do transaction opportunities. When you look at what's got legacy culturally, is it high turn fast fashion where you can't even remember the name? Or is it Gucci, right? That's built a brand that lasts, that invests in big moments in public spaces to reinforce their status in the ecosystem.
Yeah. We have definitely been saying to people that brand is back as the trends of zero click and the performance of some types of lead generation goes down. And as people become a little bit more sort of skeptical about giving away their contact details online, or just as skeptical of brands, in less trusting in brands in general. And so, it was natural for them to turn to out of home. And at the same time, the barriers to entry, I would say, with some of these campaign types, formats that you're talking about, are coming down. You can do a small digital campaign targeting one company if you really want it. So it is becoming more accessible to more brands.
Certainly via the programmatic DSPs, there's no doubt. We have a chunk of our business that focuses on that. And the programmatic DSPs it's a gateway drug, right? It's a way in where I can get very targeted, very focused for a short period of time. What's critical in that is to really make sure you get expert buying advice. You still need people pulling the levers who really understand how out of home works, how different it is from market to market, from within a market, how formats work together, and can really be quite selective using those tools. I think it's a little dangerous if you have a digitally native buyer with very little out of home experience and they go on Trade Desk and flip the out of home switch and might accumulate a lot of impressions at a low cost. But how did it disperse in the field? How did it present in the field? Did it work as an out-of-home buy? That part I get worried about sometimes, and I think it's created some not optimal experiences for brands new to out-of-home because they feel like, hey, I bought out-of-home. Well, no, you bought a little bit of programmatic, and maybe it wasn't bought super well. And then that can give you a misunderstanding as to what out-of-home might be able to do for you.
Right. But in theory, if done well, this is a sort of stepping stone into a more traditional thing where you can go onto Trade Desk and with some help, take some digital assets. And
With some good help, I think it's a very effective way in.
wonderful. Just as we wrap here, Rick, any final advice for startups, early, late stage startups thinking about jumping into out-of-home in 2026?
Think like an investor and a citizen of the space, and make sure you have expert advice.
Excellent. Rick Robinson is the CEO of PJX Media. Rick, great to see you here again. If people want to reach out to you, where should they go?
You can go to pjxmedia.com or rick@pjxmedia.com.
Wonderful. And we'll add those contact details to the show notes. Rick, thanks for your time. It's great to see you again. You too, Nicole. This was great. And thanks to you all for listening. Hopefully that was useful. And we will see you all again this time next week.